Thank you for tuning into the Devy Devotional Podcast, a monthly show focusing on Devy prospects, strategies, and incoming rookies. Now here's your host.
Welcome back to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A. As always, I'm joined by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. Tonight we have a very special guest, Levi Valentine at Levi_Valentine on Twitter. He is joining us tonight because we're going to be covering a C2C draft that we were all in. And we've been talking about it for at least a couple weeks now, maybe even a couple months now, Aaron and I, about this draft. We did the NFL side. Now we finally did the campus side. And by the way, that took quite a while, guys. But this is the Tale of Two Rivals C2C League. And if you don't know what Tale of Two Rivals is, it is a vintage podcast that was defunct for quite a while, but has been rebooted recently by at FF_Banterman and at FF_Spaceman, and they're back in the game. So, we have to thank Todd for everything that he's done, getting this pod together, getting the boys together. But I think we also have something else we want to talk about with Todd.
We do. Todd's been promising the people C2C content for, I think, about a year now, and he still hasn't delivered. And in addition to that, since my podcast, which I'm Levi Valentine, by the way, John invited me on here to set the record straight. And I used to be on the Fantasy Players Club podcast, which I've since retired from. But I think Todd heard that, and he started talking trash on his podcast, calling my draft here a dumpster fire, saying it's called the Levi. As our good friend Lee Corso says, not so fast, Todd. I am operating the spit tonight, and you are going to get roasted for how bad your draft was. Todd, you said on Tale of Two Rivals this was your least favorite campus team you've ever drafted, and I can see why. You traded up to get Travion at 102, Mayer at 202, and Brock Bowers at 207. Those are great players, especially with the 1.5 points per reception for tight ends, but it did cost you your first and your second next year. And then when you were finally up again after trading out of picks out of rounds 3 through 5, you took Kamar Wheaton at 607, Spencer Rattler at 706, and Agaye Hall at 807, all of which have a lot of talent, but also a lot of questions about how much they actually love football. I'm starting to wonder if you even love football, Todd. All three of these guys transferred to worse football schools and situations this offseason. Your next two picks were Kanata Mumpfield and Kyle McCord in the 10th and the 11th. I like both of these guys, but again, there are questions here, Todd. For Mumpfield, he's a Pitt who just lost their quarterback, their offensive coordinator, and their top wide receiver in Jordan Addison, who Aaron smartly drafted in this draft. And on top of that, you have head coach Pat Narduzzi last week throw his former offensive coordinator under the bus at media days, saying, our old offensive coordinator had no desire to run the ball. Everybody knew it. He was stubborn. I mean, Wake Forest, 118th in run defense, and we threw the ball every down. When we ran it for 10 yards, but that wasn't good enough. I think you and Pat Narduzzi are about the same level of intelligence, Todd, because that game was the ACC championship, which Pitt not only won 45-21, but they averaged 2.9 yards per rush, not the 10 that Narduzzi claimed. Additionally, Kenny Pickett finished third in the Heisman voting, Jordan Addison won the Blitnikoff, and Pitt finished third nationally in scoring. And yet, this genius head coach here decides that his offensive coordinator was stubborn and didn't like the way he ran things. That idiot doesn't seem likely to throw the ball, so I have a hard time getting excited about your pick here in Mumpfield, Todd. And then you got Kyle McCord, who's probably a good quarterback, but who knows? We haven't seen him on the field. He's not starting this year, so we maybe see him next year if he doesn't get beat out by Devin Brown or whoever they bring in for the 2023 class. Bottom line, Todd, I like your top three picks, but the following 9 rounds, I'm not a fan of at all. Aaron gave you a B in this draft. I think Aaron was generous. I'd be closer to a D.
Oh, that first of all, that was absolutely amazing. I did not introduce Levi very well, but I wanted him to get right into that. And so, once again, that was amazing. I agree that Todd does not deserve a B. We talked about it before we went live, how Aaron might have been a little too nice with his grades. And, that's showing with, if Banterman has a D with that that top 10, then it kind of shows right there. But once again, Levi is from the Fantasy Players Club podcast, maybe the now defunct as well podcast, or maybe they'll be back at some point, kind of do the rebrand and the retool at some point as well. But he's also a good friend of mine, and knows a lot about Devy, and we talk about daily about all this kind of stuff. So I wanted to bring him on. He was obviously in the draft as well, and we'll get into his team here in a little bit. But
thanks, John.
Absolutely,
that's the nicest thing you've ever said about me. So
it probably was. He's also my arch nemesis on the dynasty side. Luckily, I'm much better at the Devy part than he is. But on the dynasty side, he is my arch nemesis. So. So, Aaron, what do you think of Levi's comments here, and do you agree?
Well, hey guys, this is going to be the most delayed intro and the greatest intro ever on Devy Devotional. Absolutely. Well, I'm doing well tonight, and as far as the analysis on Todd's roster, I think it's all fair as far as the criticism goes. I did a in-depth article, a write-up on everybody's draft for this league, and I gave out grades. They were all from A to B minus. So I didn't think that anybody truly bombed this draft. But yes, I probably could have been a little bit harsh or spread the grades out to maybe C's or even D's, as Levi said. So I think that Todd had one of the most interesting drafts out there, though. And like Levi said, if it was maybe a more incentive to draft tight ends, maybe this would have been even a more dominant team, but it's only a slight tight end premium, and it's only start one tight end. So yeah, I think that's a fair introduction to team banter, boys.
I agree. And, once again, I think people get caught up in tight end premium, but this isn't much of a premium. And, you just have to, you can't get overly excited, and I understand it's Banterman's first, Devy leagues, C2C leagues, obviously. Oh wait, I'm getting notes now. It's not? That's so weird. Just the way he drafted, I kind of assumed, but, oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'm actually learning this is not, and he actually is running the league. So yeah, this is all new news to me. But enough about Todd. There's 11 other people in this draft, and we wanted to go over some of the strategies involved and things that we saw, like things that stuck out. We're going to focus on the top half, or like the top part of the campus side this time, because we're actually going to break this into two pods. There's 45 rounds in this draft, and so we felt like if we were actually going to analyze and have a little fun with it and do whatever, it was either going to be a 4-hour draft or a 4-hour pod, or we were going to go ahead and turn it into two pods. So we are going to do that, and we'll do that. We'll have the second part in probably a week or two. We're going to go ahead and lock down that date here pretty soon. Mike, Daddy's Home FF is going to bed. It's 8:21. I'm actually still surprised that he's still up. So I appreciate it, Mike. We'll hopefully you can listen to the podcast when you wake up at like 4 a.m. But why don't we go ahead and dive into it? I want to go ahead and start off with Aaron, not because he's the co-host, not because I love him, but because of what he did in the beginning of this draft. He was wheeling and dealing. We've kind of talked about it on other podcasts and things that Aaron and I have been on, but I don't really think we've touched on it too much here on the Devy Devotional. So, Aaron, what was your strategy going into it? And then what happened in the beginning? Go ahead and let everyone know.
Yeah, so as far as my strategy, I was just trying to land as much top-end talent as I could. I didn't want to completely nuke my future, so I wasn't trying to trade away all of my picks, but I did want to make sure that I landed quite a few of these upper-end guys. Just the way that I see the C2C landscape out there, there's a lot of depth to be had in the early to mid rounds, or even later into the draft. You can always get guys late in the draft who will contribute for your CFF side of your team, which is important. I mean, you got to score points if you want to compete, and those guys can be found in the 30s, even the 40s at times. So my priority was, okay, I will handle some of those guys later in the draft, but let me move up and get Bryce Young, Emeka Egbuka, Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, Donovan Edwards, and that is kind of how my first 5 picks panned out there. So I had to trade back, of course, elsewhere. After that, I had a pick in the 5th, the 7th, the 9th. And, after that, it was a little bit of a mixed bag as well. But I like the early part of the draft for me, I think that there's a lot of upside there, youth, to my squad. But yeah, what do you guys think?
I loved all of it except for the fact that you sniped me like over and over and over again. And we've talked about on the pod before, how I'm higher on Egbuka than a lot of people, and a little bit lower on Harrison. I love Josh Downs. I might be the highest person on Josh Downs, and yet he didn't make it back to me. So I really, and I've said it before, maybe not on this pod once again, but I might have been naive in my first C2C to think that Downs was going to fall to me in the third, and you traded up a couple picks before me and went ahead and grabbed him there. So, and I know you kind of touched on it, but Aaron ended up with picks 8, 16, 24, 28, 30, and then 56 to kind of start off the draft. So that just shows you the amount of trading that he did in the beginning. I really felt like I learned a lot by watching it, once again being my first. And then, the fact that he sniped me over and over again, you have to learn from stuff like that. What'd you think about it, Levi?
I really liked what you did, Aaron. I think I told you from the beginning, your Bryce Young pick, 108 as the third quarterback off the board behind Caleb Williams. I think that was great value, especially, I mean, the guy won the Heisman last year, and you're getting him at the 8th pick in this super flex draft. And, he only has one more year at Bama before he goes pro. And I think Caleb Williams has a lot to like, but I don't know if he's as sure of a thing as Bryce Young is to go as one of the top 5-10 picks in the NFL draft. So I like that one a lot, especially where you got him. I liked how aggressive you were in the first 3 rounds. You have a great trio of receivers that you mentioned in Addison, Egbuka, and Downs. Your top running backs are a bit unproven in Edwards and Cardwell, but I think they have a lot of upside, and I think that's what you're looking for at that point in the draft. There's only so many of those running backs who've already shown it on the field to go around those first couple rounds. So I think I like what you did a lot overall.
Yeah, it was like, once again, I felt like it was a masterclass there of how to do it, because you're getting players that are going to be great on the campus side, but they're also going to be Devy studs or NFL studs eventually, and so I loved that. Did you really get into what you ended up giving up in like future picks and things like that, Aaron? I can't remember now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate those comments. And ultimately, what I gave up was just a first. So I ended up with 2 2023 seconds, and then third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So really, maintained most of my picks besides trading from the first down to a second. That's the net. Individual moves, yeah, I mean, I made a lot of moves, so it would be hard to discuss all of those. But that was my goal, not to blow up my future, try to maintain as much as I can while, like you guys laid out, land some really solid core players.
Yeah, definitely. And so, you don't have your 23 first. Is this something that you would do every time, or, did you just feel like maybe being a little more risky this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was doing this team grade for everybody, I looked at future picks for a couple of teams, and it's just so tantalizing to have multiple future firsts. So our guy Matlock, I mean, he has 4 firsts. Finero, he has 2 firsts, 2 seconds next year, and that's very tempting to try to get a lot of those future picks. We have to keep in mind, A, they're depleted. B, they're going to take that much longer to actually ever contribute to your team. And I really think that, similar to later or mid to later rounds in the startup, supplemental drafts, you can find a lot of talent a little bit later. You don't necessarily have to have that first round pick to really nail it. So yeah, I would probably do this strategy again. It's the long-winded way to answer your question, John. I'm fine with this. I wouldn't say every time. It depends who you're dealing with, league mate wise. But yeah, that's my answer there.
We got Todd in the chat. he's not happy with Mike. I don't know if he caught all of Levi's speech or not. He probably not if he's going after Mike. But maybe he can listen to it tomorrow. And Aaron is the teacher who won't read essays and give everyone's B's. That's basically what happened. Everyone got a B. Everyone wins participation trophies and all that kind of jazz. But enough about Aaron. His head's not going to fit on the pod anymore. So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Levi, now, and see what was your strategy going into it, and then did that change quickly, or did you just kind of go with the flow?
I pretty well stuck to my strategy, and we talked a little bit about this just throughout the course of the draft and between the three of us. But my strategy was for the first 10 rounds, I drafted almost entirely as a Devy draft, focused really heavily on upside during those rounds. And I think you see that come through when you look at the results. Rounds 11 through 15, I would say I had a bit of both Devy and CFF. And then kind of the last 25 rounds, I went mostly with CFF and sprinkled a few Devy picks in. So I like how it turned out. It was really nerve wracking being 3 picks in and having no players who had done anything on a college field, because I took Quinn Ewers, Nicholas Singleton, and Branson Robinson with my first 3 picks, which wasn't exactly how I drew it up, but that's where I felt like the value was. But then I was able to stick to my strategy the rest of the draft, and I think I should have a good team this year and hopefully a really good team next year, since I have quite a few younger players from those first 10 rounds and the additional ones I sprinkled throughout the draft.
Yeah, and you obviously have a very young team, at least in the beginning. The part that we're covering tonight, do you kind of, like I was talking with Aaron? Is that something that you would do again? Is it something that you had? I guess you had already said you didn't really plan for it, but I guess there's always risk involved when you're talking about these younger players and everything. It's great to have them, for the future, and especially on the campus side. I mean, if you can play them 3 to 4 years, that's going to be amazing. But was it just the way they were falling, or was this like a strict strategy that you were trying?
A little of both. Like I said, I was aiming for a lot of upside this first 10 rounds, and some of that was players like JoJo Earl, Jason McClellan, LJ Johnson, who've been around a year. Alton McCaskill, who tore his ACL and looked really good last year, but then ended the year on that, and so he's probably going to miss this year. So I felt like those first 3 I mentioned were in good spots to hopefully get production this year and get on the field after not doing a lot their freshman year. And then McCaskill, is kind of somebody you're punting on this year and looking towards next year. So I felt that kind of all lined up for having those players come on my second year. And that's kind of what I ended up doing in my first C2C draft that I did with Aaron in our other league last year as well. And I really like how my team set up this year. So I kind of took a similar strategy this year, but tried to get a lot more CFF producers in the latter part of this draft, which I think Aaron picked up on when he did his review.
Yeah, absolutely. And we won't get into all of those depth picks or later on picks, but your strategy very much veered off. I mean, you were intentional with your strategy, of course, try to still compete on the CFF side, the campus side. So I really respect that strategy. You and Drew, for example, started off very similarly. I like Drew's just chipping away at solid, maybe NFL prospects, but you're trying to do both. So it'll be very interesting to see if you're able to pull that off, because that'd be quite a feat. All this young talent plus success on the campus side, maybe go into the playoffs. That would be interesting for your build. So I like it, but as you said, a lot of risk. If you're investing in primarily freshmen or guys like JoJo Earl, who really haven't done anything yet, man, there's a lot of room for big error. And if things go south, if things just don't break right, could be kind of a tough situation. But I think that you landed enough talent later in the draft where I think guys are going to break through, even if some of these earlier round guys are a bit risky.
Yeah, one thing I noticed with Levi's draft here, at least at the top end, was that there weren't a lot of reaches. And I don't think that he made a single trade, if I remember correctly. So, he just was letting people kind of fall to him, and I basically did the same thing as well. But the only real reach that I see is maybe Bo Collins. I downloaded the ADP from campustocanton.com, and I don't know how reliable it actually is. Just from based off of what I was dealing with in this draft, I feel like it's pretty good at the top end, and then you start getting into the 150 and beyond picks, and ADP just kind of goes out the window at that point. But like Bo Collins has an ADP of 54 overall, and Levi took him here at 39. But then on the other end, Alton McCaskill is 67 overall in ADP, and Levi got him here at 111. So definitely got a steal there, especially when you're talking about the CFF production.
Okay. So Todd's gonna love this right now. I do also have to piggyback off of that and bash Levi just a little bit. No, just kidding, not bashing, but just one of the things that I noticed. You talked about potentially a reach there with Bo Collins. I don't mind it because Collins actually flashed a good amount last season. I kind of like Collins, but I did not like the Texas A&M bet of LJ Johnson that early in the 7th. I know he could be the next guy up, like in Spiller's role, but Spiller was not a CFF stud. Spiller was not a good NFL draft pick. As John said in previous podcasts, he wasn't that great of a prospect. And that was Spiller who broke out as a true freshman versus we're looking at LJ Johnson not really doing a lot. So I opted in my draft to go Amari Daniels, who is getting some carries apparently ahead of LJ Johnson in the 37th round. So that was kind of my pivot there for the Texas A&M backfield, maybe as the guy to eventually replace Devin Achane. So I guess that is probably the pick that I would go with as far as a reach, but that's just if I'm trying to get critical of specific picks for you.
I mean, technically, once again, don't know how reliable it is, but technically by ADP, it was not a reach. So, like he's going a lot earlier. In fact, I think I was listening to a pod earlier, and they were talking about how they feel like LJ Johnson is just way overhyped right now. And according to the 49 overall ADP, that does seem pretty accurate.
And that's kind of what was my thought when I'd made that pick, because I didn't love it, but I felt like he was going later than I would have expected, and so I felt like I had to take a shot just based on the upside there at that point. And to your point about Bo Collins, I think, John, you said he was going in like the mid 50s in ADP,
54,
and I got him at
39.
39. So the thing in this draft to note too is I had the 10th pick in this snake draft, and so my next pick after 39 was 58. So some of that's just trying to get your guy when you have the opportunity, not knowing necessarily if he'll make it back to you at that end of the draft.
Yeah, and John and Levi had very similar strategies in this draft, not really trading around. So Levi had to get his guy because he was not really going to try to trade up into that next or later that round. So that is one of the reasons why I'm always trying to trade around, because I'm like, if I want Bo Collins, I'm just going to go get Bo Collins. If I'm truly believing he's a tier above the rest of the guys, I'm probably not going to reach on him. Maybe I'll trade back and try to snag him. But that can also backfire, or it can cost you in terms of later picks, future picks. So there's some give and take. But yeah, like you said, with the strategy that you deployed in this draft, that's how you had to do it. You had to take Collins when you did.
Yeah, and I basically did the same thing. I didn't make my first trade until like the mid 30s as far as rounds. So it wasn't intentional, though. It was more, and I mean, I think Levi's only been in one other C2C draft, so like he's not that much more experienced than I am. But I think it's just the lack of experience for me. It's so hard to value those later rounds or even future rounds. Obviously, I can pretty easily value like a 23 first and that kind of thing. But you start talking about a 23 ninth or whatever, and it just gets a lot more difficult to value when you're talking about like 4 or 5 picks and 4 or 5 rounds that you're trying to trade value with and everything. I was close on some trades, but it just never really seemed to make sense. And I was happy just kind of doing what Levi did and just kind of taking the players as they fell and just, seeing who I liked and who I was going to take next.
Yeah. One of the people who did a lot of trading was Matlock that you mentioned, John. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about my team, but first we can talk about Matlock because he did a lot of those trades with Aaron, especially in the beginning. It might have been all of the trades, honestly. I don't know. In the beginning there, it was kind of wild. Every time like some kind of notification came up, it was either Matlock making a trade or Aaron making a trade, it seemed like. But he actually didn't make his first pick until 46 overall. So that just shows you how much wheeling and dealing he did. Aaron had touched on how many future picks he has, and he has a lot of future capital, and then he got some depth pieces like later on in the draft and everything. But his first pick is Devin Neal at 46. Then Zach Charbonnet, Tyler Van Dyke, Will Levis, Jacob Coing, Dwayne McBride. I mean, there's some decent players here. Maybe more on the campus side or on the on the CFF side more than anything else. But what do you think of that start? What do you think of the trades and everything that happened there, Levi?
I don't know. Looking at his results, it was all right, but it's hard. He does have the 4 firsts next year, no seconds and 2/3, so that's fine, I guess. But if you're looking at your top 3 picks being Neal, Charbonnet, and Van Dyke, I don't know if I love that. I'd probably rather try to lock in some of the higher end talent that's actually proven something on the field if you can in those first 3 rounds, and then bet I'm going to be able to pick 3 freshmen that become studs next year, which I'm kind of a hypocrite, I guess, because I took 3 freshmen to start this draft, essentially, with, if you count Quinn Ewers as a freshman. So maybe I shouldn't be the one to make that point, but that's probably my preference, honestly.
Yeah, obviously everyone does it a different way, or else it wouldn't work. But like, it's definitely risky, but sometimes that can pay off. I mean, if they end up, we have some big names coming in next year, and if he gets some huge hits, then it won't even matter. I do think, like I said, that he has some good players for the college football side, like even getting beyond that, like into like Dontavian Wicks, Tavian Thomas, Nathaniel Dell, Adonai Mitchell, Jack Beck. Like, there's some players there that are probably going to put up some points, and it's I wouldn't say that I think he's going to be like a stud on the campus side, but I think he could be in the mix at the very least. And if he can add some studs next year, then we might be like, man, this is the way to do it,
Yeah, and I would kind of mirror some of the points that you made, John. I really like the CFF upside. I think I'm more bullish on Matlock or now 9th round Mafia, his startup strategy. So
yeah, he had like every pick in the 9th round, so he ended up changing his name mid draft there, and because I forget what it was, but he had like 6 picks in the 9th round.
Yeah, no, I mean, he had quite a few there, and especially around that range, like a couple in the 8th, and yeah. Anyways, I did like his draft, and Levi said, I don't know if I love having Devin Neal, Charbonnet, Tyler Van Dyke, McBride as like some of the starting points, but if your intention is not to draft those NFL guys early on, if you just want to get CFF studs, and you continue to hammer that throughout the whole draft, that has to mean something as far as winning on the college side. So I ended up giving this team a B+ grade. Coming into this, I was thinking, okay, I'm not going to rate this team that high. And then I just saw how good this team's upside could be as far as the CFF or the campus side. So like John said, maybe a couple guys leak into the NFL side. I don't think there's going to be a ton of NFL studs coming from this team, but this should be a very interesting case study and just to observe how this team does in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely higher on Tyler Van Dyke than a lot of people, and even Dontavian Wicks. I like him, as a prospect that could be maybe a day 2 pick. I don't know, who knows. But beyond that, there's probably not too much NFL upside. We probably need to go look at Matlock's NFL team and see if that's going to end up hurting him on that side. That's not necessarily what we're doing on the Devy Devotional today, but it definitely could be something that affects him. But maybe he just felt that confident. We need to get some comments from Matlock here in the chat and find out if he was just that damn confident about his NFL side that he was willing to just kind of say screw it and go with the college football players there.
He just said that he left for dinner right as we started talking about his team.
Oh no!
Bad timing, right? What does Todd say? Todd says, my team is destroying you in your league this year. I'm taking that Empire money. Okay, Todd.
Yeah, unfortunately, Todd, I don't know if you know this, but tight ends don't score that much in college football. Like, when your entire team is just tight ends and nothing else, then yeah, that's not the greatest way to do it. Why don't we go ahead and talk about my team real quick, and then we can get into some other teams that we thought kind of stood out. We can get into I am your Huckleberry, who was the highest grade by Aaron. So we all need to be more like Zach there. And Drew says, man, the fire tossing. We have fun here, that's the whole point of doing this, and we send it into the chat of the league so that everyone could go ahead and dive into the comments and do all that. Once again, I didn't necessarily have a strategy, except for because of my NFL side having Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson locked down for years to come. I felt pretty confident that I didn't need to go like all in on QBs like right away, or get an early QB. I actually passed up Bryce Young to let Aaron get him at 8, and I took Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, I would not do that in probably a normal league, but this isn't necessarily a normal league when it comes to QB scoring, and so that was why I was willing to do it. In this league, you get 1 point for every 30 passing yards, and then it's only 4 points per passing touchdown, but 6 points per rushing touchdown, and 1 yard for rushing, or for every 10 yards rushing, and all that. So rushing QBs are premium here. Bryce Young does not run. He literally had 0 yards rushing last year when you include all the sacks and all that kind of stuff. So while I love Bryce Young as a talent and everything, in this league, he's not going to start for me anyway anytime soon. So I just think that that's why I was willing to let him fall. Whether maybe I'll kick myself later on, but I love getting Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's going to be a stud on college, on the NFL side. Everything came back around, got Sean Tucker, so now I'm feeling really good about my running backs. I know maybe I'm probably higher on Tucker than a lot of people as far as like NFL stuff, like going into the NFL, but I don't think you can really argue with what he's going to do on the college side at the very least. But I do think he has that NFL upside. And then it came back, and I don't know, I've kind of seen a mixed bag on how people feel about Ja'Cory Brooks. I took him at 31. He has an ADP of 20, so technically I got a steal, I guess, like a full round steal. But then I hear some people they're just kind of all out, or they don't even mention his name when they're talking about Alabama. So maybe it's just the whole Bama dynamic and just no one knows who the hell is going to be good there or whatever it is. But what do you guys think of the Ja'Cory Brooks there? Or I guess the top 3 picks. What do you guys think of those?
I appreciate you allowing me making this decision for me to draft Bryce Young. So you took Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs and Bryce Young were my top 2 remaining and in the same tier. So you made the decision for me, and I think that you made a fine decision there. I don't have a strong preference. Like you said, there's a slight you said it was a pretty decent difference in scoring. And I mean, I'm not so sure that there's that big of a difference scoring. It's a couple of points per game. But ultimately, quarterbacks not quite as effective in this league if they're not top end rushers, if that makes sense. So I like Jahmyr Gibbs there. I do think that maybe Tucker Brooks were a bit early, but at the end of the day, if you believe in your guys, you got to go and get them. And I think that Ja'Cory Brooks, he's probably my favorite there, maybe other than Jermaine Burton, to just dominate targets at Alabama. And we know those guys get drafted, and he has the size and he has enough athleticism. So I'm high on Brooks. I think that's where you have to take him in a lot of places because he's probably not going to fall to you in the middle of the 4th. So I was fine with that start to your draft.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Aaron, it's 30 points per 30 passing yards per point instead of 25. So it's only about 2-point difference if over 300 yards passing, which is a slight difference, but not a huge difference maker for me. As far as the Alabama receivers, it feels like everybody's just assuming it's going to be Jermaine Burton because he was pretty good at Georgia, and we saw what happened last year with Jamison Williams, and there's some recency bias there, I think, that we just assume that the next transfer is going to be able to do that as well. But I'm kind of the opinion that between Brooks, Earl, and Jermaine Burton, and then Tyler Harrell, I don't know if we really know who's going to be getting the lion's share of the receiving work in that offense this year. And I think there's a decent chance it could be any of those 3 between Burton, Brooks, and JoJo Earl. So like I said, I took a chance on JoJo Earl. You took Ja'Cory Brooks. I can't remember who got Jermaine Burton, but I think that it's probably going to be one of those 3 or maybe 2, but I don't think anybody really knows which one it's going to be. I think we're all just kind of guessing. And so I think if you want Brooks and want a chance to have one of those guys, you had to take him where you got him, John.
Yeah, and as far as Burton, I've mentioned on the pod before that I'm not the biggest Burton fan, just because like he was good on Georgia, but I mean he didn't really stand out. And I mean if we were going to give Todd any kind of nod, which I mean I try not to, but Bowers just dominated compared to what Burton did. So it just seems like you said, people are just kind of giving it to him like, oh, he's transferring to Alabama, he's going to be the stud, and it's like, well, there's some really good players on this team. It might not. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm right or that you're right with JoJo or whatever. Like we just don't know at this point. So I'm perfectly fine taking the upside there, the Alabama cred and all that kind of stuff. Where I probably reached, but once again, I guess I'm leaning towards the the rushing QBs here and probably giving them a little more of a premium than you guys are from the sounds of it. But I went ahead and reached on Tyler Buckner in the 4th round. And I mean, even by ADP, it's a reach. It says ADP of 56. I took him at 42 overall. So, over a round reach there. But I was looking at the players that were left. I was planning on taking some of the QBs that went maybe a little bit before him. And I started looking at who was left. And he was one of the few that I thought actually had like NFL upside possibly and was a rushing QB. And so I wanted to go ahead and take advantage of that. And so I did. I mean, I don't know that I love it, especially like going back and looking at my team. I'm like, I mean, I kind of intentionally punted QB, but at the same time, when you look and you're starting or your number 1 QB on your team is Tyler Buckner, you're like, okay, maybe this is a weakness here,
And
I think it's just a lot of. Go ahead. I was just gonna say I think it's a lot of just unknowns. We haven't seen him a lot on the field yet. He's high pedigree recruit, and I think the other unknown there is you have a new head coach, and so we didn't see a high flying offense under Brian Kelly, and I don't know if we have a strong feeling for what it's going to look like under their new coach now that he's no longer there. So that could be a positive thing, or it could be a non-factor. I guess we'll see this season. What do you think, Aaron?
I was just going to add that not that quarterback is a weakness there, but there's just a lot of unknown in the 4th round, drafting a guy like Levi said with the limited experience. And ultimately, that's why people go the late round quarterback strategy in C2C leagues. That's why they wait a while, because there's still a lot of studs available within the first 4 or 5 rounds typically. So I'm not hating on Buckner. I actually really like him. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks in that range if you are going to go quarterback that early. But I think I had told people elsewhere in the draft, I just don't like going quarterback that early. I was fortunate enough to get Bryce Young really early on, but if I didn't land Bryce Young, I was waiting till the 8th, 9th, 10th round to start, or 7th, 8th, or 9th round to start drafting quarterback. I'm just more unwilling to take one quite that early unless they're a really solidified top tier guy.
Yeah, and it was a reach. I perfectly fine admitting that. Once again with the lack of experience there, I just didn't know exactly how quickly. I was watching the QBs go pretty quickly. I started looking at the rushing QBs and I went ahead and took them. But, once we got into the later rounds and I started seeing some other QBs that I probably could have taken, maybe, in the future I would have waited there. If I was still doing the whole punting QB approach and that kind of thing, I probably would have waited. And he very well could have fallen at least another round, and then I would have felt a lot better about it. But in the 5th, I took Blake Corum. I finally got a snipe on Aaron. He had sniped me about 10 times at that point, and so he finally reached in the DMs and said, "Hey man, you took my guy." And I was like, "Thank God!" It finally needed one. I took Isaiah Nayer after that, and I talked to Aaron about this one after I made the pick, and I felt like that was kind of where he needed to go, even though technically. This is being shown as like a major reach by ADP. His ADP is 93 overall, and I took him at 66. But Jacob Cohen went like 2 or 3 picks before I took Isaiah Nayer, and I kind of had them in like similar ballparks, but I actually had Nayer ahead of Cohen. And so I was like, well, if Cohen's going, I kind of have to take him at this point. Do you guys think that was just way too much of a reach, or you think I was kind of, being level-headed there?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't have a strong opinion because I am a Nair supporter. I'm a fan. I like the move to Texas, and he's done everything you could ask of him so far in his collegiate career. So I don't really love the idea of drafting off ADP. I found myself just not using it very much. And to be honest, yeah, I was kind of throwing that out the window. I did check it every once in a while during the draft just to make sure I wasn't crazy. But there were times where ADP just did not match up. So I think that was a fair example to get your guy in Nair. I'm not going to judge you there. And what did Drew say here? Nair plus big arm Ewers, great duo. Yep, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wanted him, and I, like I said, I saw some players that I had going around him, or I have in my rankings around him, and I just decided to go ahead and get him. Honestly, I was kind of with you. Like, I was looking at ADP in the beginning, and it just seemed to be kind of out the window pretty early. I mean, there were still some that made sense, but a lot of it was just I started going off of my rankings, and at that point, I'm probably going to disagree with a lot of other people on rankings, and so I just didn't even really care. I was just going to take my guys at that point. What did you think of the Nayers pick there?
I liked it. I think kind of what you guys are touching on after the first 3 to 5 rounds, and even then, I don't know if it really matters that much, but especially after those rounds, just go get your guy. If you really want somebody in this format, there's so much uncertainty that if you feel strongly about somebody, you should go get them regardless of ADP. And I think that ADP varies a lot in this format. So even if you're averaging together a bunch of drafts, it may not be the most reliable for your draft. Kind of like what we see in Scott Fishbowl, honestly, where it just varies so much depending on people's individual strategies and things and how a certain league goes. So I like the talent, and I think it's fine value where you got him, John.
Appreciate that. Let's not make this entire thing about me. I'll go quickly over the rest of my picks, and then we'll move on to a different team. I took Zay Flowers. After that, Malik Neighbors, Montrell Johnson, Dante Damas Jr., Isaiah Bond, Jatavian Sanders, Dante Thornton, Brian Thomas, and Cameron Rising, which was another snipe that I had on Aaron, which I felt pretty good about that one. I think he was perplexed that Devy Beth even picked up on Rising, because he's like, what are you picking up on? Like, how'd you find Rising here? And I was like, well, this is what Devy Beth is looking at and everything. So that's what I'm saying. Like, some of these QBs in the later rounds, I probably could have felt like pretty good with them, at least on the college side, because I'm not really worried about the NFL side as much for at least a little while. So you guys want to go ahead and jump into Huckleberry, since he's the A- rated player? Was he the only A?
Well, if you want to know my grade for my team.
Oh, yeah.
I was tied with Huckleberry as far as my own assessment. Of course, biased, right? So that makes sense. But
just like every other evaluator in this draft, Aaron, you gave yourself the best grade. We've had 3 team evavaluations now, and every person has themselves as the best.
Whoa. No, one of them is random, and 2 of them are handwritten. So yeah.
I am tied with Huckleberry, and I found myself having a very similar strategy to him throughout. So that was one of the reasons that I had him so high. I actually think that in some ways his draft was better than mine, but he has no picks next year. He has, I'll have to look back. It's like a 3rd and a 6th are his best picks in the 20.
Yeah, he made a lot of trades as well, and used future capital, like you were saying.
Yeah, so very, very much a talented team that has a blend of CFF and potentially NFL future guys. I really liked his draft, how he orchestrated it. I think the tight end upside is absolutely there. A couple of the high-end guys like Michael Trigg and Arik Gilbert. Some risk, of course, with both of them. So there was some risk with this draft, but then also some safe bets as far as guys who will contribute scoring-wise for his team. So he just commented, Zach just commented, great minds think alike, but I still have 15 picks next year. That is true. So if you draft well next year, you still have a shot. So that's another reason why your team was deserving of, tied for the highest of the entire league.
Yeah, I agree. We kind of touched in our personal group chat here, I guess, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to say 3-way, but in our 3-way, we talked about how we really liked his college football running backs. Like, he's going to score a shitload of points with the running backs here, and that was one of the reasons why we ended up really liking his team, even though he had some nice. I mean, obviously he's Xavier Worthy. He has JSN. Like, he has some studs that are going to become NFL talent. But then even on the CFF side, he has some studs that are probably going to score a lot of points. So, was there anything else that stood out, or what did you love about the running backs here?
He's got a couple of Maction studs, Lou Nichols and Rasheen Ali. So
he totally sniped me on Nichols. I thought for sure I was getting Nichols, and I guess I'm just so used to being the one that's like so much higher than everyone else on the Devy side that I just didn't even really worry about it. But on the campus side, it's a little different.
Yeah, I really liked how he paired those CFF stud running backs with a couple of just overall studs in JSN and Worthy, and I think that's going to make for a really tough starting lineup to beat once the season comes around. Yeah,
I think the only thing, like, I like Evan Stewart. I think he has. Aaron and I have kind of touched on him on previous pods. I like his. I like the possibility of what it can be and the promise and everything as a prospect, but I do feel like it was a little bit of a reach there in the third round. I Yeah, I mean, it wasn't terrible or anything like that by any means, but I just feel like there was some other players that he could have possibly taken advantage of there. Maybe I'll be wrong when it's all said and done, but once again, I have to go back and look at the actual picks. But just even once again, ADP is nothing, but like even by ADP, it was a little bit of a reach.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, JSN, Xavier Worthy are amazing. Wide receiver core after that, yes, some question marks. And going Stewart that early in the third round, there's always risk with that approach. We talked about risk with Levi's draft, with Drew's draft, a lot of guys who went freshman heavy. And, young guys were going off the board fast. Zach is totally right on that. They were a hot commodity in this draft, which is why I was trying to scoop up some of the last talented ones in the later rounds. I was just happy a few of them fell to me. So we can talk about later rounds another day, but I did think that, yeah, early rounds, you did have to jump on freshmen in this draft. That's true.
Yeah, and the running backs we were talking about were Lou Nichols, Rasheen Ali. Those were the two big ones. That he can probably bank on quite a bit. But even getting into more of like CFF, I'm not big on Anthony Richardson for NFL purposes. But I mean, I guess he could always take that step. He just hasn't done it yet. But I do think that he'll score some points for college football and everything. So that's a great pick there. And I was considering him around that pick as well, and I don't even like him. So I don't know if Zach's the same way there. We've talked about Drake May. I'm probably the biggest Drake May fan at this point. Some of it got a little rough there at the end, where it seemed like maybe Zach started like. I don't know if he started using different ranks or whatever, but he started getting some reaches there with Travis Dye, Ketron Jackson, Jordan Mims, Cartavius Norton. They're in the 10th through 15th picks, like that kind of thing. What do you guys think about that? Do you think those were as big a reaches as ADP is making it sound? Either one.
Yeah, right. We're both just shocked that they were picked there. No, I'm just kidding.
There it is. All right, we dropped you down to a B+.
No, I didn't mind those. Like, I thought Javonte Barnes. Yeah, actually, maybe I'll say I thought they were a tad early. Not that I hate them by any means. They're his guys. He is high on them. I think a lot of us ended up going with our guys that we were high on, and freshmen were going off the board hot. So that's simply when we had to throw ADP out the window and quote unquote reach on these guys. But at that point in the draft, 6th round and so on, again, ADP doesn't really apply. You can reach on guys, assuming that you're feeling really good about them, and we'll just see how it pans out.
Yeah, I agree with Aaron. I mean, he pretty much had his starting lineup set after those first 7-8 picks. So I think at that point in the draft, if you want to take a shot and get some of your guys, I'm not going to criticize you too much for that, even if they were a little early if you go by ADP.
All right, so I think we've talked enough about Zach's team. I mean, he has a great squad. We'll see how it all works out with all of those reaches at the back end, if he has the depth that he needs, which seems to be a common equation with him, because he doesn't have depth on the NFL side either. So we'll see if that all works out. All right, so Aaron, or actually, you had your we talked about your number one team, Levi. Was there anyone that truly stood out beyond the players or the teams that we've already touched on in this draft that you really either liked their team, hated their team, or even just like you loved the strategy or thought it was interesting?
Yeah, the one that stuck out to me that I had written down was Mayor McGrumble, or the Paul Rudd touch, if you're going by his name on Sleeper. I really love what he did at running back. He had the 101 and he took Bijan, and then he traded up and got Braylon at the 112. And then he picked up Deuce Vaughn in the 5th. So you've got 3 players at running back there who should be elite producers this year for CFF purposes. And 2 of those, and maybe all 3, we'll see with Vaughn, should get pretty good NFL draft capital too when they come out. Of course, Vaughn, we'll see with his size what the NFL thinks of that. But he's been extremely good at Kansas State. The downside is there aren't a lot of proven wide receivers to go with those running backs in the early rounds of the draft. He did do a nice job of rounding out his quarterback room, though. He went upside with Aller and Klubnik in the 3rd and 4th round, and then he had landed Brandon Armstrong and Clay Millen in the 12th and the 16th. So I think he did a good job of getting a couple of freshmen that could, that have high recruiting rankings and could be good contributors down the road with some NFL upside, and then complement that with some good CFF producers in Millen and Armstrong. So I liked what he did at quarterback and running back in this draft.
Yeah, I have to agree on those points, but I think you briefly touched on the wide receiver room, and I'm left wanting more. And I don't think that there's going to be enough starting depth, especially with the CFF scorers and the high end guys that you need to compete. He's going to have to make some trades if that's truly his goal. But like you said, there's a lot of NFL upside there, and he has some of the quarterbacks, he has some of the running backs in place, just a few moves away in that context. So that's why he wasn't higher as far as a grade for me. So the book is not shut. I mean, we're still, this is preseason, right? There's still a lot of time for these team trajectories to change. That's for sure.
Yeah, once again, Aaron's just being too damn nice. Your wide receivers suck, dude. You have some amazing running backs here, but and honestly, I'll give you some credit because you stole, whether you listen to the pod or not, you stole Keaton Mitchell from me. I just talked about him like a pod or two ago, and so I really thought that I was going to be taking him there around that like 10th round, whatever it was, and I did not get him. So I will give you credit for that. Your running backs are amazing. Drew Allar is obviously a big name or a hot name, but I don't know that he's necessarily, Aaron had talked about how he's not necessarily like guaranteed anything this year. So, we'd have to get into the deeper rounds, and we'll do that in the future and see like how the rest of his QBs play out and everything. But, you got some work to do, and he's a trader. So like I don't think it's going to necessarily be a problem for him, and he obviously has the running back talent to make some moves. So I think we'll see a little bit more of that. But I don't think that we can get out of this pod without talking about Kevin Coleman at Du Bois on Twitter, and just kind of shitting on his team a little bit because it's what we do here, and we have fun here. So is there anything that stands out? Well, actually, no. I'm going to go ahead and start us off here. We just got done talking about Will Shipley and how he sucks, and on the Campus to Canton pod, and so on the Brandon Lejeune pod on our pod, and so sorry, I'm getting all of them mixed up here at this point. But Will Shipley has no vision. He's terrible, and yet you took him here in the 2nd round, and it's just you hate to see it. You really do. But Caleb Williams, great pick. If you had taken him, in the 2nd round, it would have been an amazing pick, but you took him at 5 overall. Jermaine Burton, we already talked about how he sucks. He got doubled up by a tight end. No, I'm just being mean to be mean at this point, boys. What do you guys think of Kevin's team here?
My biggest
go ahead.
My biggest gripe is that we could draft FCS players in this draft, and he did not draft Kevin Coleman. He let somebody else get him.
Oh no,
unforgivable.
Oh no, Aaron, what do you think of those first few picks there?
Yeah, I think I kind of echo you in some ways when we're looking at his early rounds, and that was part of my summary or my analysis of his team. It's like those guys really got a hit. So like you said, Shipley has some pros cons with this play right now. Jermaine Burton, question marks. Cameron Ward in the 4th round, a lot of question marks, whether he's even a decent college player, let alone an NFL prospect. Kendall Milton, what has he done so far? I'm not saying these guys can't hit, but they need to hit for this team to have a lot of success. So I liked especially his mid rounds, I felt like, or in the 20s in the teens leading up to the 20s. I really did like a lot of those selections. But yeah, the first, maybe 6, 7, 8 rounds, I think that there's some risk associated with them. I didn't have strong takeaways, strong dislikes by any means, Kevin. So I'll be nice to you here for sure.
I completely agree with Aaron. I don't think he'll compete for 3 to 4 years at this point. It's just, no, there were some good picks mixed in. We've talked about Talon Shetron and Matthew Golden on recent pods, how they definitely have some high upside. And so there was definitely some good picks here as well. Unfortunately, I don't think we have enough time to touch on everyone's drafts, but we do have Drew Christensen in the chat here. So why don't we touch on his team a little bit? He went ahead and started off. He must have traded his first round pick, because I'm seeing his first pick was 13th overall. So I'm assuming he traded his first overall pick here. But he starts off with Quentin Johnson, Marvin Harrison Jr., which I really don't mind. In the mid 20s, like that kind of thing. Jaden Blue, Devin Brown, I guess Johnson's done something, but then beyond that, it's a lot of upside picks there. Is he just the freshman guy? He's kind of already talked about that there in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've drafted with Drew before. That's a tendency. I actually was co-commish with in another C2C startup once with Drew, and we were able to kind of meet in the middle there and not go so freshman heavy. But this draft was another one, shooting for a lot of upside in the future and that youth movement for sure. Quentin Johnston for sure could be a good player in this upcoming class. I don't know. I think we're a little bit torn on the upside of that player between John and I. But yeah, just a lot of nice upside players. And when we talked about all the Alabama bets that we're making, you should take the round discount and you should get JoJo Earl. Oh no, it's going to be Ja'Cory Brooks. It's going to be Jermaine Burton. Well, maybe it's going to be in the 14th round, Christian Larry. The guy was tearing it up with the second team in preseason. He has all the athleticism in the world. He's been with the team for a year. He's been doing nothing but impressing. He was actually in my queue, or high up in my queue, when he was selected by Drew here. So I like that pick, for example. So there's a lot of guys here who were talented at one point. DJU, Jaden Hazelwood. The list kind of goes on. So an interesting build for sure, but I don't see it as like a CFF contender, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you go that heavy, like freshman heavy, or young player heavy in the beginning, it's probably going to be tough to be a true contender. But you could end up with some studs, and it could pay off in the long run. It's not really the way that I wanted to go into my first C2C draft, but I can't say that I wouldn't do it in the future. If it just worked out that way. So we're sitting right around an hour here. I'm trying to look through some of these teams to see if anybody truly stands out. I'm going to go ahead and say I do not know Bell F54. I don't know you as a person. I'm not trying to be mean here, but Jackson Dart in the second is not the way. My buddy, my brother in Christ. It's just not the way that we do things. So,
in my write-up, I did kind of say there were a few reaches, but I think Zach Evans right away could be a good way, kind of a home run pick if he hits. But yeah, some reaches there. I
love Zach Evans. I'm probably higher on Zach Evans than most, and so I definitely love that pick as much shit as I gave him for the Dart pick.
There was a lot of steals, especially as we started getting a bit later in the draft, that I liked. So there were a bunch of guys who I was kind of jealous of. Let's say that. But yeah, some early reaches for Team Bell, I suppose.
I think the biggest steal of the draft was Fanero's trade with Todd, though. When Todd traded up to get Travion Henderson, he got to trade up from the 106 to the 102. He paid his future first and second. And he also traded the 407, and he got back the 102, Fanero's 2023 round 8 pick, and the 11-2 in this draft. So I thought that was a home run for Fanero. And when you look at the players that they ended up getting, of course, Todd took Travion Henderson with his pick at the 102, but Fanero went from Travion Henderson to Keishon Butte and got that future first, second, and all that other stuff on top. So I thought that was an excellent trade by Fanero.
With that trade alone, I gotta move him up from the B- I gave him. Wow.
I will say that Fanero seems to have some players that will at least be good on the college side. So he could be another one that competes here, with Cedric Tillman, who we've talked about recently. We've talked about all these players. I guess I just always say that we've talked about them recently because we've literally talked about every single player over the course of like the last month. But, Hendon Hooker, same team, obviously. And then getting into like Malik Cunningham, CFF, probably not going to ever be like a NFL prospect or anything like that, but definitely a CFF play there. So he has some pieces there if it can all work out and everything. And then the last one I want to talk about was with Joey the Tooth. obviously getting CJ Stroud there at the top. You know me, I have to talk about Tank Bigsby on every single pod, and I'm going to do it here. Don't draft Tank Bigsby. It's not quite as bad as the Jackson Dart pick there in the second round, but it's pretty damn close. I'm not going to lie. but there's some good picks here, and I love Jaden Reed. I really do love me some Jaden Reed, especially in the campus side there, and even Marshawn Lloyd. I like that pick as well. Will Rogers, I think, is a good quality pick there for Campus Canton, and Jaquavius Marks. I really don't mind that pick at all. So I think there were some good picks there. Like for the campus side, even though when you're talking about like NFL purposes, there's probably only like 2 or 3 that I truly love on his team. So everyone has their different strategies here. Even though we're having fun and I'm probably having the most fun with talking shit about your teams. We're everyone has their own strategies, and we're not everyone's looking for NFL talent right now. So that's just the way it all works out when these drafts happen. But we decided to split this into 2 drafts, or 2. I said it again, 2 pods, because we're already at an hour. We've only talked about 15 rounds. There's 45 total rounds here, so there's a lot more players to get into. We'll have to do a little bit better of a job of being efficient, more efficient on the next pod. Maybe it'll be a little bit longer, but let's go ahead and get out of here. Levi, I know that you're no longer doing the Fantasy Players Club. Are you continuing to do that like Devy daily, whatever it was called, that you were doing last year, or are you all done with that as well?
I haven't done that this offseason. What John's referring to is last season I posted kind of a profile for a Devy player every day on my Twitter feed, which is at Levi_Valentine. So I don't have that there, but I do still have the occasional fantasy football tweet, and I'm going to try to maybe be a little more active on there. So go check it out at Levi_Valentine on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. And there was, you know me, I'm all about the stats. And Levi put a lot of good stats. In fact, he reached out, not necessarily just to me, but you could tell it was mostly just me. And he was asking, like, what metrics should I put into these posts and that kind of thing. And everyone else said what they said. And then I DM'd him, privately, and was just like, hey, just disregard all of that. Here's the stats that you want to go ahead and put into it. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it was a lot of fun. It was cool. And then, he got yelled at by some college dads and everything. It was definitely good fun. But
I was not the first or the last to get yelled at by Kendall Milton's dad online.
I know. Honestly, what's amazing is that last year during the off season, I had no idea who Kendall Milton was. I just kind of assumed he was like some no-name player or whatever. And Levi was talking about his dad like ripping him a new one, and now I find out that he's being drafted by Kevin Coleman in the 5th round of a C2C draft, when he should be drafted in the 15th round. And it's just, it's kind of wild how like everything goes full circle.
Yeah, he's all because I reported the 40 time on those profiles that 24/7 had instead of some other laser timed one that he ran faster at. So
he's slow. Moral of the story.
Exactly.
And as far as any news for me too, I wanted to put it out there that I'm going to be putting out my C2C ranks, so positional ranks. So that will be coming out soon. So you can find those. I'll post about it on my Twitter account. So at Aaron Wilcox 86 is where you can find me there.
Yeah, I'm going to try and recruit Aaron into my Patreon and go ahead and get that combo so that we can really get people excited about it. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I'm going to try. We're going to sit down and talk numbers here pretty soon. So I appreciate you guys listening. This has been a lot of fun. Once again, kind of like what Aaron talked about in his write-up. Don't take any of this personally. We're all just having fun here. But I hope that you guys, as the listeners, learned from this, whether it was just where people were going, strategies involved, and or just the fact that Todd doesn't know what he's doing. Regardless of what it is, it's just we all had a lot of fun. I love Campus to Canton. I'm so glad that I joined this thing. But Levi, it looks like he had something to say here.
Yeah, Todd, take it personally. Nobody else.
There it is. We love to see it. So we will be back. I'm going to try and get everyone back in a week because I feel like it makes more sense to be back in a week because we're doing 2 pods for 1 draft. If that works, we will be back in a week. If not, 2 weeks. Regardless, we will come up with a date and we will post that as soon as possible. We'll go ahead and talk about the rest of this draft, and then we'll get back into some other normal. Maybe we'll actually have some like college news and stuff like that after after that. So I don't know. We're getting pretty damn close here, where we don't have much news right now, but it's getting a lot more exciting.
1 month from today, we'll have college games on your TV, baby.
I didn't know that they even played on TV, but this is something new I'm going to have to look into. This is all very exciting. Thank you so much for listening, guys. We will be back as soon as possible, but for now, we're cashing out.